May the words of my mouth and meditations of my heart be always acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. It's so weird. If you're me, what's kind of strange is that the entire 8:30 service sits right there. And now we've completely flipped, and I don't quite understand that. That's not my sermon, it's just weird. So both Paul and the Gospel share with us two very different kinds of gifts. Paul's gifts, I love Paul. He's one of my favorite figures in the Bible, and whenever you read Paul, I find, because sometimes he says some outrageous things or things that I totally disagree with, but Paul is such a confident, passionate person, and he has so many gifts, but humility is not one of them. And so even when he's making a wonderful point, he has to throw in there how, right before he says that all of it doesn't matter, he says, I was a Pharisee and I was the greatest of all the Pharisees. And when it came to the law, no one in the world followed the law more than I. And he goes on and on. And then, of course, he says, but none of it matters because it's through Christ he has found greater gifts. But Paul is someone who has brought tremendous gifts of confidence, gifts of intelligence. He's a tremendously talented theologian, and in a lot of ways helped to create well, of course he created the church. So Paul is tremendous. And then we have a completely different set of gifts when we come to Mary. There's different readings of this story. The story comes across in different ways. In Mark's gospel, it's not Mary that brings the nard, but a very wealthy woman who kind of comes out of the woodwork. We don't know what her name is. And she offers Jesus this nard. And it wasn't Judas who says, why didn't we sell this? It's a variety of people. It's just a bunch of people said, why didn't we sell this and give it to the poor? And but regardless, we have this perfume, this pure nard. And Derek and Mike Dove somehow independently both researched this. He was fantastic at it and explained to me what it is. I still don't quite understand what nard is. It's very expensive. It comes from a plant. And it would have amounted to 300 denarii. To give you an idea of the kind of gift that was given, you have to imagine that Jesus and his disciples, we tend to overlook this, were basically homeless, right? They didn't have a house. None of them had jobs. They all quit their jobs to follow Jesus, right? This is something that, for some reason, we continually forget. The Son of God is a homeless guy. And he's there going from place to place. Presumably Lazarus has a house, so they're at Lazarus' house because he's homeless, right? So they're there. They don't have 2 pennies to rub together. They mostly rely on other people and the grace of God to find food. And then out of the woodwork comes Mary. It says she bought it. The modern equivalent in terms of price would be somewhere between $20,000 and $25,000 for this nard. So imagine the scenario where we got a bunch of homeless guys squatting in a house, and then Mary shows up with $25,000 worth of perfume. And they use it all in one shot. That's sort of in a lot of ways, this is not the sermon that I'm going to preach, but that is the church in a nutshell, in a sense, in a lot of very real and powerful ways. A tremendous poverty, and yet at the same time, tremendous generosity. Tremendous poverty, tremendous wealth. Anyway, so Mary brings this gift, and there's a lot of powerful symbols going on. The reason why you would use this very expensive gift, it's a weird process of when you're buried, you're anointed with all kinds of perfumes. They had very different traditions around burial. And she uses this partly to anoint him, because they all know that he's going to die when he enters Jerusalem. This is a week before Passover, which is to say a week before the Last Supper, which is why we're getting this reading today, as it's a week before Holy Week. So we encounter these two incredible gifts. And we should wrestle with these. What do we do with a story where $25,000 worth of perfume is given to Jesus to anoint him before his death? This is also used for coronations. This is what, if you were going to anoint a king. In the Gospel of Mark, the perfume is not used on his feet. And in John, this makes perfect sense because we have the foot washing a week later. In Mark, the perfume is used on Jesus' head to prepare for the crown of thorns, but also the crown of the resurrection and the crown of him as the King of glory, the Son of God. It makes perfect sense that she would use that which is used to anoint a king for Jesus. But what do we do with this image? $25,000 being spent on a homeless guy. And Paul, one of the great geniuses of the early church, continually humbling himself with presumably very small churches, the churches that Paul founded. Well, I believe we're called, our church is called to be great. There's been a long tendency of the church. I don't want to create a pole between greatness and humility, but the church that I often encounter is a church that emphasizes humility, that we're all equal in the eyes of God. We're all children of God. Some of us might have greater abilities than others, but we're all basically the same. And we encounter that throughout the Scriptures. But we also encounter a long list throughout the Bible of greatness, of this woman who comes out of the woodwork to give Jesus all of this amazing perfume and creating a moment of coronation. The genius of Paul, the greatness of David, the prophets, and what the prophets often humble the priests and prophets of other traditions. And we may have underemphasized as a church, because the Bible certainly doesn't underemphasize this, underemphasized greatness, that God is calling us to be great. Those of us who are intelligent, the artists in our midst, those who are very strong, those who are wise, those who are energetic, perhaps have the energy and innocence of youth, those of us who are wealthy and powerful, those who have empathy, who are very social, who are very quiet and contemplative. We all have a tremendous amount of gifts. Where humility often always weaves its way through this is the greatest among us are often seen by the world as the weakest, in the sense that the church values those who love and have the capacity to be loved as the greatest among us. But we all have myriad gifts in this parish, and God is calling us to share those gifts with one another and with the world. And there's sort of a catch. The catch is that we're also called to love everyone, and we're called to love God. And here's the catch with being gifted. If you've ever fallen in love, or if you fall in love with, either romantically, you fell in love with your child, you fell in love with a community, what do you tend to do when you fall in love? You start spending all kinds of money that you shouldn't be spending, and giving time that you shouldn't give. You aren't working as hard at work. You're trying to show off. You got all kinds of cool abilities, so you use them. You're a good singer, so you write a song, and it's not a very good song, but you write it. All of the gifts that you have, and including, we give everything. I mean, for children in childbirth, Women give their bodies. In love, it's the same thing. Romantic love, we give ourselves physically. All the gifts we have. We give everything we have, and we don't even think about it. And we just, until we're used up, if we can. So that's the catch. The catch is, it sounds so simple. God wants us to love everyone and love God. But the problem is, for all of us who are gifted, for all of us who truly love God, we end up sharing those gifts a lot. And it feels good, because being asked to share isn't a big deal. It's one of the most rudimentary theological concepts that we are taught. We don't think of it as a theological concept when we're giving a red crayon to somebody, even though we wanted to keep the red crayon. It also feels really good when we got that blue crayon that someone else is using, and they've almost used it all. Actually, I think when I was a kid, it was black. That's it. Boys, it's always black crayons. There's always one black crayon. It was about that big. There's always way too many yellow, and who uses yellow crayons? So it feels good. I don't know why I'm not preaching about crayons. It feels good to share, because it feels good to love. So my sermon this morning is very simple. We all have tremendous gifts. I preached a sermon a few months ago about how we have a profound responsibility to share with one another the gifts that we have, but also to alert one another that they are indeed gifted. This is an ongoing theme. You might see around you a room full of people who are immeasurably gifted, and each one of those people might be oblivious to what those gifts are. They might have pigeonholed themselves into one place, or maybe you think that they don't really have any gifts. So that's a hugely important thing. But second to that, there are others of us that are very proud of some incredible gifts that we have to give. And we often feel that when we're in church, we have to mute those gifts and hide them because we're supposed to be humble when we're in church. And the reality is we're called to share those gifts. This is how, how they're supposed to be used. We share them in love, just like we do if we were in love with our fellow parishioners. Here's this song that I want to write for you guys. Here's this beautiful painting that I painted. I thought you'd all want to see it. I'm a really good cook. I thought I'd invite you I thought I'd bring some of my soup to this Tuesday evening thing, or maybe come over for dinner, because I want you to try some of this amazing garlic bread that isn't good for you at all, but it tastes amazing. Right? Well, I can do that one. That's a gift. I can make garlic bread, not much else, but I can grill cheese. We all have immeasurable gifts, and we should be proud of them. But the catch is, if we have incredible gifts, we are called upon in love to share. To share all that we have with God, and to share with those whom we love.